The World Health Assembly's global nutrition targets are set to be due by 2025, with nutrition being one of the top global health priorities. However, some experts say nutrition is falling as a global health priority, partly because nutrition is thought to be complex because there are various components of it. There's the food sector, there's diet, there's lifestyle, and then there's also the impact of climate change. On today's episode of Public Health in Real Life, we'll be talking about nutrition on a broader basis. Public Health in Real Life is a platform where we aim to provide public health information to a global audience. We hope to celebrate unsung heroes, and then we also hope to inspire the next generation of leaders. My name is Maimunat Alex-Adeomi, and I'll be your co-host today. Also introducing my co-host, Sunithra. Sunithra, over to you.
Thank you, Maimunat. Welcome to Public Health in Real Life. My name is Sunithra Kadambi, and I'm a global public health professional. We're absolutely delighted that you could join us for this conversation today with our distinguished guest to examine the intersection of micronutrients, urban communities, and public health. So before we are heading into the program, before that, I would like to recommend and encourage all of you to start sharing questions and comments in the chat box. We want to bring you into this conversation, so please get your comments at the ready. So joining us today is an amazing entrepreneur, mentor, and health coach. A former national level pharmacist in the UK, she's all about natural remedies, who went on to start her own organic supplement brand, Amala Pure Health. Komal believes that if we don't address a person with all the different facets, then we'll never be able to deliver a truly effective solution when it comes to managing someone's health and well-being. What's further special about her is that she's a huge advocate of pharmacists diversifying their roles and creating portfolio careers. She loves helping the next generation pharmacists to reinvent their careers through her training and coaching program. She's also the host of the Happy Healthcare Professionals weekly live show. Today, she will be sharing with us about micronutrients and their impact on urban population health. Let's welcome Komal George.
Hello. How are you?
Yeah, doing well. Komal, it's so good to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for joining, Komal.
It's my absolute pleasure, ladies. I'm so pleased to be here and be able to have this discussion with you guys.
So Komal, help us understand the importance of micronutrients and their significance in public health.
Yeah, sure. So before we talk about micronutrients, let's just talk about kind of the difference between micronutrients and macronutrients, right? So macronutrients, we're kind of very familiar with what those are. There are fats, there are proteins, there are carbohydrates. They're the big foods that we tend to look at when we look at nutrition. The micronutrients, however, are the individual chemical compounds that are found in trace elements from natural sources. So they include our vitamins and our minerals. So that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about micronutrients here.
Great. Thanks for giving us the neat heads up. So it's a very interesting facet of yours. You're a pharmacist and you've combined your passion and knowledge into forming a brand. So why turmeric?
Sure. So yes, my first product that we launched is a turmeric supplement. And for me, it's a very personal product because I grew up in an Indian household. And so the spice tin was the medicine cabinet. And that meant that whenever we had any coughs or colds or injuries, the very, very first place that my mother and that my grandmother would go to would be the spice tin. And turmeric was inevitably one of those spices that we would use to help support our health and our well-being. And so I hold turmeric very dearly to me because it is a spice that I've grown up with. But actually, what I found really, really fascinating when I started my brand was that it actually came out of after many, many years of having been a pharmacist, for a long, long time not having really had the kind of knowledge or the understanding of how micronutrients and our diet plays into our health. And post-pregnancy, my first pregnancy in 2015, I was looking for a natural immune booster. And that's when turmeric came back into my life, so to speak. And my mother gave me a bottle of turmeric capsules and she said, you need to take these every single day. They're going to really help with your immunity and your energy. And of course, the pharmacist in me started looking at this bottle of turmeric thinking, I am curious about what is in here. Why is it in here? You know, having up until that point, not really taken any supplements apart from a multivitamin during my pregnancy, you know, I became really, really interested in this particular supplement and why were these ingredients in it. And that kind of curiosity sparked this real desire to want to know more about turmeric. And I was just astounded by all of the studies behind turmeric, you know, its effects, its anti-inflammatory effects, its immune boosting properties, its cardioprotective properties. And I just thought, wow, this is such an incredible spice. And that's really kind of where, why turmeric was the first product that we launched. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm truly able to relate to you and say every time you had some health issue, you go back to this spice box. I've been through a very similar situation, definitely. And definitely there are a lot of properties that we would explore about turmeric, and a lot of other aspects that you touched upon. We'll definitely follow up with that. But to start with, what are some other micronutrients that you would recommend people in the Western countries incorporate into their lifestyle now that you've spoken about turmeric?
So this is actually a really big question, right? Because what micronutrients we need is very much related to our lifestyles and our diets. And I think over much more recently, we've become so much more aware of that. You know, I was talking about how as in my pregnancy, I was taking a multivitamin, and we often kind of feel like the multivitamin is the thing to go to. But I challenge that thinking, really. My belief is that so far as the micronutrients we should be taking, we should really be having those tailored to us, and tailored in a way that takes into account our lifestyles, where we live, our ethnicity, you know, perhaps our epigenetics, you know, our pharmacogenetics. I think it's so important that in terms of the nutrients that we do need, that we're really kind of tailoring those. And so they can be different. We're obviously all aware of vitamin D being the one that we all, you know, need to take, particularly those of us who live in the Northern Hemisphere. But, you know, there are, I would say, so far as the other nutrients are concerned, it really has to be tailored to the individual, depending on their lifestyle and their diet and where they live and their ethnicity, etc. So yeah, it's not a straightforward answer.
Truly, yeah. But it does seem very important that you tailor your intake of micronutrients based on where you are and your genetic makeup. That definitely makes a lot of sense. So, Maimunat, do you want to go over other questions?
Yeah, so that's actually a great intersection of diet, lifestyle, and genetic makeup that you've highlighted, Komal. And I think it's particularly interesting that you come from a pharmacy background, and here you are preaching about micronutrients. We all know that term where they say food is medicine. A few studies, however, have shown that taking some of these micronutrients and all are packaged as, you know, supplements or dietary supplements. And a few studies have shown that they don't necessarily confer any added protection. In fact, a lot of national food and drug regulatory agencies do not necessarily endorse those products. So what's your take on that?
It's a really interesting question, actually, because I think a lot of it is to do with the fact that there isn't the research behind a lot of these micronutrients that we're talking about. And, you know, there are various reasons for that, you know, in terms of kind of like the relationship between micronutrients and particular disease states, for example. So it's difficult to be able to attribute a particular disease state as a result of, you know, a lack of a particular micronutrient. We're aware of kind of big conditions like rickets and things like that, but you know, it can be quite difficult to kind of correlate a particular disease state in relation to a micronutrient, to a lack of a micronutrient, so to speak. But I think also what's really interesting about this question is the fact that, you know, we forget that actually we get our micronutrients from our diet. And so, you know, there is this theory that we should really be focusing on the diet first before we are bringing in supplementation. And, you know, just to differentiate. So when we're talking about turmeric's actually a spice, right? It's an ingredient that we use to enhance our food. And that's quite different to some of the micronutrients that we talk about in terms of like vitamin C or vitamin D or selenium or iodine or, you know, all of those chemical compounds, so to speak. So just to kind of differentiate that actually spices are kind of one aspect of you know, where you may obtain some micronutrients from, but then you've also got actual micronutrients that you get from eating the fruits and the vegetables and the whole grains, you know, and the proteins that, you know, naturally occurring proteins that you consume. So yeah, so it's not, I hope I've answered your question there, Maimunat.
No, yes, you have. And you actually did bring a very great point about turmeric in of itself containing even further micronutrients. So that's the spice, which brings me to my next question about, you know, culture, urbanization, and globalization. You had mentioned previously the spice cabinet, at least in the Indian culture. For me, in the African culture, it was a lot of all those herbs and plants that we took that our grandmothers would boil and, you know, just give us to drink. The thing you said, which you highlighted, was there hasn't been a lot of research into what these contain and those protective properties. So with the rise of urbanization and globalization, some of those cultural practices were deemed archaic or not deemed appropriate, and you know, people were adopting a more modern lifestyle. But then that has now led to the rise of non-communicable diseases like we've seen. So the question now is, should we try to go back to those roots of trying to go back to where, you know, Mother Earth, where we go to food is medicine and nature? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, to be honest, Maimunat, on that. You know, I think that urbanization has really massively, you know, it is attributable to a decrease in our health, you know, in well-being, in our ability to obtain the right nutrients. So it's quite interesting because some of the studies look at diversity of food may increase by being in an urban environment. So, you know, the fact that urbanization, what does that result? You have urbanization that results in supermarkets. What happens in supermarkets? You have more variety, right? You have more variety, but then simultaneously you have more highly processed foods because you have more convenience foods in place. And that then results in, you know, the health of a population, you know, the dietary intake of a population to actually become more unhealthy. And that's obviously going to then lead to your non-communicable diseases, right? Obesity, weight gain, etc. So I think it's so important to bring that, you know, to have that understanding of the fact that, you know, we do need to really think about how our natural diets have actually affected our health over the long term, and think about whether we are incorporating that into our daily lifestyles. I know for myself, incorporating spices has been the key thing. It's, if we think about my genetic makeup, I'm Indian by heritage. And so my body is assimilated and designed to be able to, obtain nutrients from foods which are Indian foods, right? That's what my lineage, my heritage has grown up with. And I think more and more awareness of that is now coming to the fore, that people are realizing that, the more we do stick to our indigenous diets, actually the more benefit that brings us, because the diversity was already there. The requirement of, the way in which we obtain the nutrients was already there. Yeah.
That's actually a great point, and I think it might touch on a little bit of a sensitive topic, because we talk about diversification, with everything happening in the world now politically, and everybody trying to ensure that there isn't discrimination. But you encourage that we have to look into our epigenetic makeups and feed ourselves, entertain ourselves, whatever it is that feeds into who we are genetically. How do you marry those two with trying to encourage lack of discrimination and diversity, but then people still going to their roots because that's what feeds them, or that's what nourishes them, literally and figuratively?
I think I think there needs to be more research done into this area. I also think that we need to encourage that more. I think that we often see, and this could be a bit contentious, but we often see the Western diet as being like the ideal diet, so to speak, right? It's loaded with lots of, it's seen as being a better diet overall, etc. But especially by countries, elmic countries, right? Mm-hmm. So, I think we need to change the narrative around that. We need to work much more about educating people on the benefits of their indigenous diets to their health. And we can do that through really helping them to understand. And this is where I feel the huge research and leaps that have happened in epigenetics and pharmacogenomics, that will help to reinforce the data, right, behind why it's so important for us to maintain our indigenous diets. And it shows it on a genetic level. And that's where I think that we need to kind of be moving healthcare. Healthcare needs to be moving in the much more personalized space, right?
Yeah. Well said, Komal.
Cannot agree with you. Now, I really want to, at this point in conversation, I really want to delve into a prevalent situation as of now. It's like all adults nowadays about 30 years, they like we've been discussing, we all take multivitamins. And it's also that the micronutrition market itself it's booming and it's become a multi-billion-dollar business in itself. So how do we combat this situation of the market wanting us to buy micronutrients, and us realizing that there are we can make it part of our diet and go back to our roots? So let's talk on the business aspects of micronutrients also.
Yeah, I mean, I do believe that, and I touched upon this earlier, that I really do believe that in terms of like multivitamins, I don't actually believe that we need to be taking multivitamins. And that might sound a bit contentious to some people, but I do genuinely believe that I don't think that we should all be taking multivitamins. What we should be doing is looking at our diets first, right? What we should be doing is assessing whether our diets are providing us with the nutritional content that we need, right? And we do that first and foremost by analyzing what it is that we eat and the diversity of the foods that we eat, and how close that might or might not be aligned to your indigenous diet. And so that's where I think we need to be starting. And then when it comes to this industry, really, I believe that we really need to be better at helping people to understand what they need, so that they're not taking supplements just for the sake of them, but just because somebody said I should be taking X, Y, and Z, right? That they're taking them because that's the right supplement for them. And I really do believe that we need to get much more better at being able to, as most certainly as healthcare professionals, as a pharmacist, you go into any pharmacy, and what's the first thing you see? The first thing you see are supplements, right? They fill the shelves, right? And I do believe that we are really well placed, obviously, as pharmacy, to be able to guide patients on what the right supplements for them are. But I also think we can be better. We can do better in terms of being able to really tailor the supplements that someone needs. So, for example, if you are on a plant-based diet, you don't necessarily need to be having a multivitamin, but what you do need is B12, because we know that people who are on plant-based diets may not necessarily be getting enough B12 because they're not consuming meat, which normally would provide you with the B12, right? So, they may also need supplementation with iodine or selenium. And these are the kinds of, this is the level of kind of personalization that we need to be getting to. And actually, I would take it even a step further than that and say, when you start bringing the genetic piece into it, then it's even more personalized for the individual. So yes, it is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it's a growing industry. But I do think that within that industry, there is a shift now happening where we are moving much more towards personalization, and we are also moving much more towards quality product.
Sure. Yeah, I think this part of the conversation really brings up how unaware we might be of our own micronutrients intake and sources. So you also mentioned that as pharmacists, there are things that pharmacists can be doing to create more awareness, or create awareness on how people can tailor micronutrient intake for themselves. So moving a little further, do you have any recommendations on the side of consumers to try to understand how they can source their micronutrients, and not only from the supplements? Do you have any recommendations on that?
Yeah, I mean, I live pretty much by, I don't like to prescribe people diets, because I don't believe in that. I believe that everything's got to be really tailored to the individual, right? So I very much live by the principle that we need lots of colors in our food, in our diet. And a great way of being able to do that is to track the colors that you're eating. You can simply have the rainbow and just tick off, off of that, which colors you've eaten. And that's a great place to start for somebody who doesn't really, know where they're at in terms of, their diet. Obviously, you can do slightly more detailed analysis of what you're eating, and actually do a food diary and write down exactly what it is that you're eating. But I also think that what's really, really useful is for you to kind of really think about how much plant-based food you're eating in your diet. How many plants are you actually getting in? Is it 1 a day? Is it 3 a day? And obviously we've got some of the national guidelines that talk about 5 a day, 10 a day, all these kinds of, national guidelines around diet and nutrition. But I really do think that that's a great place to start for people, that, you look at the colors, and that's an easy way for you to kind of assess where you're at.
Sure. I think this could be more motivating, to see more colors on the plate and want to eat, a colorful diet. Yes, Maimunat, you
No,
can add.
that's really great. I couldn't agree with you more, Sunithra and Komal. It's funny you mentioned the color. My kids in school were learning about the color wheel and diets, and making sure that you eat foods that basically fit into that color wheel. Now it's actually interesting you bring that notion of eating and diet and color and foods. One thing we know the globe is experiencing now is climate change. And because of climate change, because of the rise in need to feed consumer bases in places like US and other developed nations, there has been a rise in using genetically modified foods. So that has also inadvertently led to the rise of the multi-billion-dollar supplement industry, because people now say that the average supplement you would expect to eat from foods isn't there because of those changes I said, rise of GMOs and climate change. What is your take on that, and what would be your at least expert advice on tackling that?
There's I mean, the evidence is pretty clear that soil degradation as a result of over farming has resulted in fewer nutrients in our foods compared to 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and and beyond. And that is pretty, it's pretty stark in terms of the evidence there. Climate change obviously plays into that. There is a question though over what do we do about it. We talk about, for example, perhaps going organic because we know that the soil is going to be looked after. We know that it's going to give enough time for the climate to recover. We know that those farming practices are going to help to rebuild the nutrient density within our fruits and vegetables and our natural foods that we eat. However, what that results in is the disparity in price. When we talk about, if I wanted to have an organic, locally grown shopping basket, it's going to cost me a lot more than buying the same produce from my supermarket that isn't organic and that isn't locally produced. And in what I'm seeing, and I was actually reading a report, which it was by the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, and they talked about how in the LMIC countries that actually the price difference between an unhealthy diet and a healthy diet is even bigger than it is in Western countries. So, for example, in South Africa, if you wanted to have a healthy diet, it's 69% more expensive than it is to have an unhealthy diet. And this, I think, is a real big issue for countries to be able to deal with, because we really do need to look at our food chain, our food supply chains, and how that is, and alongside climate change, and how is that actually impacting on the everyday consumer when it comes to food. Can they afford to have a better diet? And that's a big, big issue, I feel.
Yeah, definitely big, like you said, is because there's so much more beyond even nutritional experts like yourself. It's about tackling climate change and tackling the effect of urbanization and globalization, like we mentioned earlier. For anyone just joining us, this is Public Health in Real Life, and today's episode is micronutrients and health, the impact on health and wellness. And we're speaking with the lovely Komal Judge, who is a holistic pharmacist. We do have some audience questions that I want to take now, Komal. I think you've probably answered this, but it'd be good to just expand on those. Harish asked, do we need micronutrients for daily life, or do we just supplement with diet?
Yeah.
So maybe just expand on your previous response.
Yeah, I mean, I would, I'd kind of reiterate my previous response that really we need to start with our diets first. Really look at what it is that you're eating. Are you getting all of the colors into your diet? Really analyze, like, am I getting a variety of, whole grains? Am I getting a variety of fruits and vegetables? And the other thing that I would add here, and this is actually really, really important, one of the things that has happened through urbanization and also through mass production of food and the convenience of food is that we eat less seasonally. And seasonal eating is one of the best ways that we can actually increase our nutrient intake, because we are eating foods when they are at their peak, right? And so that I always recommend, most certainly my health coaching clients, to do, and I do that myself. I love looking at what's in season. So when you go to the supermarket, generally you'll find a section that says this is in season. Go to that section, because again, you'll bring the cost of your shopping basket down, because you're consuming those foods that are in season, and they will tend to be at the cheaper price when they're in season. And don't be afraid to not eat those products when they're not in season. Because the whole point is that by eating seasonally, you are getting all of the nutrients that you need over the year. So, don't be afraid to do that as well.
Definitely. I think we have another interesting question targeted to kids. We've been talking about micronutrients for adults. Does being vegan require micronutrients, particularly for kids? Because we have talked about our micronutrients being sourced from different areas. So how does being vegan, link with micronutrient intake for kids?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert when it comes to children's nutrition, so I'm not, I'm not going to say I know everything about this area at all. My belief is that, with children, it's really, really important to allow them to eat the foods that they want to eat, really. And I think that, by them doing that, their bodies are actually really, really intuitive in terms of what it needs, and this is another piece. I think we sometimes forget that our bodies actually do know what they need. We don't often listen to them enough to know what foods we should be incorporating into our diet. So I'm sorry, Haripriya, if I've not answered your question, but it's really not my area of expertise. So I'm going to put my hands up and say, it's not something that I would be able to kind of advise on.
No, I think
thank you so much for this.
Yeah, no, like Sunithra said, thank you for even just highlighting those micronutrient needs, because I think it would still be applicable to the setting within the kids. And we really appreciate your humility with saying you're not necessarily an expert in the field of, child nutrition. You mentioned something before we start, asking the final set of questions. Okay, one question came up, and I'm going to ask it an audience question, and then I'll go to the question I was going to ask. And Shula Ramesh said, is cooking fresh fruits and vegetables killing the micronutritional value already present in them naturally? That's an interesting question.
A really interesting question, actually. It's a really interesting question. There's lots of different schools of thought about this, actually. Some people believe that it does kill the micronutrient content. And really, if you think about it, from a practical perspective, if you overboil something or you overcook something, naturally the heat is going to degrade, the micronutrients within that substance. So yes, heat is going to affect it. To what degree if it affects it is the question, right? So, obviously if you're burning something, then you might as well say that it's nutritionally devoid, right? But the level at which you should be applying heat is a question, and I think the jury's out on that, as to what that should look like. But also we have to think that our bodies have been, they are designed in such a way that we have adapted to eating foods that are cooked. Yes, obviously there are certain fruits that we eat uncooked, and that, again, our bodies have adapted to that. But for the vast majority, we do need to cook our foods before we eat them. I personally, my view is that I come from an Ayurvedic tradition, and of course, like in Ayurveda, we do talk about traditional Indian families, we do cook our food. So, It also will depend upon kind of what your indigenous diet is like and how that perceives heat and, you know, cooking of foods and how your body has adapted to that. So yeah.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It's a very interesting perspective. And I think from a public health standpoint, a lot of foods, I'll say, especially in low and middle income countries, LMICs, is foods were encouraged to be boiled just to get rid of some organisms and germs that caused gastroenteral diseases. So there's the public health component to it. And now there's also that nutritional component, is how much is too much. So I think it just goes back to that, what you said earlier about, you know, research. We need to do more research, and there needs to be a lot more investment in research into indigenous foods, indigenous practices, lifestyles, which brings me to my next point I was trying to make. You had mentioned something about seasonal foods and us being okay with the fact that we couldn't eat certain things in season. And I remember growing up where mangoes were in a particular season, and when they were out of season, you just learned to live with it and you took what was there. But in today's world where things are readily available, everybody wants everything, it's hard to find that balance. What would be your recommendation?
I really love that question, because we talk about food and we talk about what's on our plate, but we sometimes forget about how we eat, right? How we eat is so important as well. And I know for myself, growing up, when in the summers here, you know, you get all of the berries, you get all the strawberries and the raspberries, and we would go strawberry picking, you know, and have those. And I used to look forward to having the strawberries, right? And there is a lot to be said about the experience of eating as well, because our experience of eating also helps us to assimilate the nutrients better from our diets. And I think there is something about us really kind of paying attention to that, you know, not living, because we're living in this convenience world and we can get everything at the drop of a hat. You know, there is something in the anticipation of a fruit or vegetable coming to fruition, right? And, you know, the real kind of, you know, glint in the eyes when you know that it's ready for you to eat, right? I mean, mangoes, I completely relate to that, Maimunat, because I have the same experience with mangoes, right? You can't wait for them to come. And when they come, consume the hell out of them. Like, eat them 3 times a day, you know, for the season that they are available. And then they're not going to come back again for the next year. But there's something about that experience of eating food seasonally that I think we've lost in, you know, in our Western lifestyle of everything being available as and when. And, you know, I think it's really important to remember that actually when we do eat fruits and vegetables at their peak, that is when we get the best nutrients out of them.
Wow, I think you reminded us of such an important aspect of eating, that is like experiencing what you eat. I think this is, I mean, I'm so excited to, you know, listen to you talking about it, because I too agree that, you know, it's more in the experience. And it's very nice that you mentioned that, you know, we are able to assimilate the nutrients and the components of the food better when you enjoy and experience eating it. Thank you so much for bringing up that point here. So you've talked so much about food and the different aspects, such multifaceted aspects of nutrition and food. So, like, can you share with us some childhood experiences or inspirations that led you to, you know, start doing this?
So many, Sunithra, so many. You know, I've always been interested in science, and I guess that was always the trigger behind ending up becoming a pharmacist. Although I always say to people, like, I was the accidental pharmacist. I didn't actually want to be a pharmacist. I became one really, really, I say by accident. But when I became one, I really fell in love with pharmacy, and I had this real desire to, you know, to do something for pharmacy rather than in pharmacy, if that makes any sense. I love eating. So, you know, always have done. And, you know, my childhood memories of my grandmother and my mother eating, you know, creating these amazing, you know, dishes, which I cannot, I'm going to put my hands up and say, I will not even attempt to try and replicate, because I will be terrible at doing that. But, you know, I've always had this real interest in food, you know, in general. And I think that, you know, being able to kind of bring that to the fore as well. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, you know, the spice tin was the medicine cabinet. And I do truly believe that, you know, that food is medicine, you know, as Maimunat mentioned earlier. And I do believe that our lifestyles, you know, we really do need to start paying much more attention to them and the impact that they have on our health and well-being.
Sure. I think you've also provided a good direction for people who are interested in food to delve deeper and also look at the nutrient intake and, you know, holistically looking at the food that we're eating. That's very inspiring. Thank you so much for that. I also want to go back to one audience question. It is, do you have any awareness programs globally to highlight the uses of turmeric, to the universities or research centers, etc.? So,
I mean, the research on turmeric is massive. I mean, I did a quick search right before we came on air because I wanted to see how many citations there are now. There's almost 6,000 citations on turmeric. You know, it's gone like this over the last few years in terms of the research into turmeric. And one thing I want to also mention about a lot of these natural products that we talk about is that, and I remember this really clearly from my pharmacognosy lectures when I was at university, is that with a lot of naturally occurring sources of chemical compounds and botanicals, it's really hard to extract out one active ingredient, right? And there's a reason for that, because, you know, with a lot of naturally occurring sources of chemical compounds as well as, you know, botanicals, these natural botanicals, they're complex. You know, they are made up of many different compounds that all work synergistically together. And it can be very difficult to isolate out individual compounds. Now, with turmeric specifically, there's been a lot of research that's done on curcumin, and curcumin is obviously the anti-inflammatory agent. It's that has been mostly researched. That said, it is part of a group of compounds, chemical compounds within turmeric called the curcuminoids. And aside from those, you've also got the turmerones as well. So when you're talking about, you know, when we're talking about turmeric, we're talking about a very complex spice, actually. You know, it contains a number of active compounds within it. And there most certainly has been research so far as turmeric being used as an anti-cancer treatment, for cancer therapies. It's been used, you know, it's been researched in terms of its cardioprotective effects, its hepatoprotective effects, its mood boosting effects. I mean, the list is endless. You know, when you say to someone, what can turmeric be used for? And you list out all of these, you know, potential effects on the body, it sounds a bit sensationalist, to be honest. Like, they're like, no way, you can't have a spice that can do all of this. But really it does. And turmeric's not the only spice that is like that. There are many other naturally occurring compounds and substances and botanicals that can have huge synergistic effects on our health and our well-being that, you know, we've only just begun to you know, scratch the surface of in terms of their effects. So I mean, in terms of like global awareness programs, I'm not aware of any just yet. but there's certainly plenty of studies to back up turmeric and its effects.
Thank you, Komal. That's really interesting. And like you said, it's just amazing that you said there are already about 6,000 citations, and I'm sure that's and counting. That's even people who have published and they've put it on the internet. Well, it would be remiss if we don't talk about micronutrients and COVID, especially as we are in a global pandemic. Some schools of thought talked about why certain ethnic minority backgrounds in the US and UK were more affected, and it was attributed to things like vitamin D deficiency. And then some other schools of thought said micronutrients or taking supplements actually even exacerbated the severity of COVID in people who caught the illness. What's your professional take on that and advice?
Yeah, so again, the evidence around vitamin D is very hit and miss, right? What we do know is that some countries, the UK government included, they did actually give out vitamin D to people who were shielding. And I've seen that that's been mirrored in some other countries as well. That said, I think what we really need to understand is that the nutritional basis of the population before we went into the pandemic, most certainly in the UK, was poor already. And so, when you think about, okay, when a pandemic actually happens, at that point, it's a bit too late, right, to be able to, overnight address all of the nutritional deficiencies that you might have. And we do know that said, we do know that, supermarket shelves were stocked out of vitamin D and vitamin C and the rest of it when the pandemic first hit. There's been some really interesting research that's been looked at, which has been part of the COVID-19 study app here. There's the Zoe app, where people can register onto the app and then give details of their symptoms on a daily basis, and also kind of give details of any supplements that they may be taking. And what they found through that is simply an observational study, but what they have found through that is that women in particular who take vitamin D, who take omega-3 and also probiotics, that there was a small reduction in their risk of contracting COVID-19. There's obviously further research that needs to be done around that to really kind of, to really kind of really look at whether that is, actually the case or not. But that was quite an interesting takeaway from there. And on the flip side, what they found is that vitamin C, zinc, and garlic, actually, so those three had no effect. So anyone who was taking vitamin C or garlic or zinc, they didn't actually provide themselves with any additional protection from being at risk of developing COVID, so contracting COVID. So that was quite interesting. But, again, I think there's still not enough information or evidence around which supplements really you should be taking in order to prevent lower your risk of contracting COVID-19. And actually, all of when you read any of the research around it, it all comes back to our diet, right? It all comes back to we still need to address the fundamental building blocks of our health and well-being, and that is our diet.
Yeah, sure. We definitely got a lot of information on this particular COVID aspect of it, and we had an audience question that was kind of tied to the COVID as well. Does micronutrient intake actually add more value for elders, like the particular subset of the population? Of any extension to your answers on this?
That's a really interesting question. I think, we could probably go so far as saying vitamin D, because we know that vitamin D is going to have immune. It does have an impact on our immune system, and therefore, is likely to to do the same in amongst the elderly population. When you look at, most certainly in the UK, most people are already vitamin D deficient. So, that's probably the one vitamin that we would go to. In terms of other micronutrients, it's difficult to say because, again, it's down to what their individual diets are like. Now, we could argue that the older population tend to eat actually more aligned to their bodies than the younger population, depending on which country you come from, obviously. I mean, I can most certainly say, growing up, my grandmother was very, very self-aware of what she ate and when she ate, and, the nutritional content of what she was eating, even though it wasn't on paper, this is what I should be eating. She was very, very self-aware of what her body needed. And so, it does vary. It will depend upon the individual very much so. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, just like you said, the physiology of, growing older and how metabolism changes helps elderly people just know that there are just certain things they can't take. And speaking of older, even I myself, I don't consider myself elderly, but I've noticed recently that there are just certain things I take and my GI is, and I'm like, what on earth is happening here? So definitely, our body's physiology changes over time. For anyone who just joined us, we have the lovely Komal Judge speaking with us today on Public Health in Real Life about macronutrients and urbanization, and I dare say, and globalization, and the impact on health and wellness. We've been talking about diets, lifestyles, how micronutrients affect our health, our well-being, wellness. And it was interesting where we mentioned about the experience of eating, even helping how our bodies absorb and, work with foods. And of course, we talked about, the COVID pandemic and its impact on health and wellness, and climate change, as everyone knows, and how climate change is changing the composition of our foods. We talked about the multi-million-dollar micro supplement industry and how people should ensure that recommendation for supplements and even eating and dieting is really personalized to care, understanding that there were factors that came into play: age, genetics, environment, lifestyle, and all of that. So, Komal, as we round up, who would you say inspires you or is an inspiration for the work you do? I know you've mentioned your mom and your grandmother. Is there anybody else?
Oh God, so many people. I'm inspired by a lot of my colleagues, especially those who are working in really innovative areas of healthcare. I mean, the list of those people goes on, to be honest. I'm really inspired by my colleagues in functional medicine as well, because I know that they are doing incredible work too. And really, I'm just inspired by other women leaders who are just doing some incredible things. Inspired by Jacinda Ardern and Michelle Obama and all these people who I do feel that I learned something from every single one of them, and inspired by you guys too. So yeah, inspired from many different places.
Well, thank you so much. It's interesting you mentioned people like Jacinda Ardern and Michelle Obama. Just last week with International Women's Day, we kept talking about leadership and how countries that had female leaders tended to do better in response to the pandemic. So, yay, women leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they bring a humility that that we unfortunately haven't seen with our male leaders, and I do think that we need more women leaders for sure.
No, thank you for highlighting that in at least this month that is considered Women's History Month. So, Sunithra, any parting words?
Sure. One word I have is wow. I learned so much through this interesting conversation about so many different aspects of food, and how these different facets about mainly about the experience of eating, and the kind of the plate that we want to eat, about the so many different aspects of micronutrient intake. It was definitely very informative, very, very informative, and we have a lot to take away Really, thank you for adding so much of your insights to this conversation, Komal. Really enjoyed having this conversation with you.
Yeah, just piggybacking off of Sunithra, thank you so much for your time, your expertise. We've had a lovely conversation, Komal. We've had a lot of audience engagement, and I'm sure people might want to reach out to you, ask more questions about nutrition and wellness. Are there social media handles that you would like to share with our audience?
Yeah, sure. You can find me normally on LinkedIn. So feel free to search Komal George on LinkedIn and you can find me there. I'm more than happy to, for anyone to reach out to me and ask me anything. I really appreciate that you invited me to talk about this topic and share my thoughts about it. And it's been such a pleasure. And I thank every single person who's watched it as well. And thank you so much for the questions as well.
Yeah, thank you, Komal. And lastly, I know you also have a channel where you provide like coaching and stuff. Do you want to share a little bit more details about that?
Yeah, so I have a YouTube channel which is called Komal the Pharmacy Career Change Coach, and that's where I support my pharmacy colleagues to reinvent their careers, to find more freedom and flexibility and fulfillment in their careers and create happy healthcare professionals. And that's the name of my live show that you mentioned at the top of the show that I do every single week, and that goes live on LinkedIn and also on my YouTube channel. So feel free to dip into that whenever you like.
Thank you so much, Komal. So for our audience and anyone watching this, once again, this is Public Health in Real Life. We had the pleasure of speaking with Komal George. We have a great lineup of speakers over the next coming months. So please like our channel, subscribe, and we hope to hear more from you over time. Thank you once again.
Maimunat, just sorry to interrupt, but just one more thing. We already discussed about this organic supplement brand, Amila Pure Health, that you're having. How can people order or buy from your brand? How do they reach you through for the turmeric supplements?
Yeah, sure. It's just amalapurehealth.com. Just go visit the site there and you can find our turmeric supplement there.
Perfect. Sure. Thanks for that, Sunithra. It would have been remiss of us not to mention your supplement after speaking so much about turmeric. Anyways, thank you all, ladies. Once again, happy Women's History Month. Let's be well, let's be safe, and hopefully see you all soon.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.